Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chair Meek, and Vice Chair Boquist, and members of the committee. I'm Jeff Golden. I represent Senate District 3, which is Southern Oregon and the Rogue Valley. Thanks for the opportunity to speak in support of Senate Bill 1593. I appreciate the chance for this hearing, Mr. Chair. I would like to say that since we have used half the hearing, if there is an opportunity in the remaining days of the session to have any overflow testimony from either side, I would certainly appreciate the opportunity for people to be heard.
Okay.
I want to keep my comments, they're not going to be super brief, but I'm trying not to take a lot of time. I want to talk about the big picture a little bit before I talk about this bill, and we've been talking about it for a while, but we know some things. We know the gravity of the threat that wildfire poses every summer to this state. We've had it demonstrated to us in some horrific ways, and could happen again. We know that dealing responsibly with it, with the threat, requires a sustainable source of funding beyond the general fund's capacity. And I would say, to hit that mark, you just made the remark that the probability is very high we're going to have to look for more Oregonians generally for help, and to the industry that primarily has its lands protected by ODF and other agencies. We've recently seen two proposals that talks about looking to Oregonians generally. Senator Steiner just mentioned one that is not in her current bill, the $10 per lot statewide fee. Rep. Evans had another proposal that was a general tax. And this bill is the only one that starts the discussion about going to the industry for more. And I think it's a good signal to our folks to show that we're considering both directions. This is a study bill. It has two sections. The first section describes how the study would be conducted and by whom, and the second section describes the proposal that would be studied. So section 1, very briefly, assigns to the state forester, in collaboration with the Legislative Revenue Office and the Department of Revenue and LPRO, in collaboration, the conduct of this study. I have met with the heads of those four agencies to talk about the logistics and how that might work. They have not promised me no fiscal impact, but they said encouraging things about how a lot of it was in the scope of their current work. And I would really like to thank Chris Alanak, who I've been bugging with questions generally about this bill, and he's taken it within his duties because he's got nothing else to do this session. Thank you, Chris. I'll say a couple things about it. You can look at section 1 and see the kinds of questions that are asked. It directs the engagement and consultation with obvious stakeholders. That includes tax fairness groups, the Oregon Forest Industry Council. They are called out. The AOC, the Fire District Association, and a number of them. It also would involve some legislators. It asks LPRO to interview legislators, two nominated by each of the four caucuses, for their policy evaluation of this proposal. And that's because we can't be asking staff to say this is good policy or this is bad policy. So it has that political engagement in it. And to come back with us by September 15th with a study and findings that could be useful potentially in a long session bill. So that's the study. Again, details are in there. I don't want to take your time to detail that too much. Section 2, the proposal to be studied is the elimination of the current harvest tax we've been hearing about, and its replacement with a restoration of a version of the timber severance tax that was discontinued in the 1990s. Some of the provisions, again, I don't want to go into great detail. It's a short bill. There's not tons of detail, but I'd like to leave time for testimony. Some provisions are intended to keep the burden manageable and equitable among different taxpayers. A couple of those is that no tax whatever is imposed on the first 25,000 board feet of timber in a given year for anyone. And then there is a step tax rate linked to acreage of the landowner. It starts at 1% for under 500 acres, goes gradually to 6% over 5,000 acres. And there is a provision that I think is really critical. I'd really like to have it understood. It is a tax credit to these landowners that can be applied against the severance tax for any corporate or personal income tax they've already paid on these harvesting activities. And the reason that's so important is because those companies, the majority of companies in the timber industry in this state, have some sort of relatively conventional corporate tax structure, and they're paying income tax at the corporate level. And that's a contribution. They're already paying some of that load. There's a whole other property tax discussion, and that there is property tax applied everywhere. But we have a small number of REITs, real estate investment trusts, that have focused more and more on forest land over the years. Those organizations do not pay tax at the corporate level. They pass on proceeds to employees and shareholders through dividends. Those are taxed as personal income. But in the case of these two very large REITs, the great majority of those shareholders don't live in Oregon. So they pay their personal income tax elsewhere. And those monies do not accrue to the benefit of our firefighting and forestry services. So because of that, because there is not that corporate income tax, they don't have available to them a credit to apply to the severance tax the way our C Corps, LLCs, you name it, would. So there is that, that provision. And let me say quickly where the revenue would go, and then I'd like to wrap up. 25% of the resulting revenue would go to ODF to cover the purposes currently covered by the harvest tax, and if there's any left over, basically for fire suppression activities. 25% would go to the Office of the State Fire Marshal for a variety of what's generically called community wildfire risk reduction programs, which the Fire Marshal has done so ably in Senate Bill 762. That's really been my main concern, because I think we're always somehow find the funds to fight our fires. And we're doing a great job at that. Where the budget cuts tend to happen are in these community risk reduction prevention areas that we've been seeing, helping people with landscapes and home hardening and evacuation, helping small volunteer rural departments with more equipment and staff, that kind of thing. And that's where that's the part that keeps me up at night. So they would get 25% of this. 40% would go to governments and taxing districts in the counties where harvest takes place. And that's compared to almost the whole 100% that they got from the whole old severance tax. And, haven't received anything like that since the discontinuation of that tax. And the last 10% will go to OWEB for restoration and protection of rural water supplies that supply many of our small cities that in some cases are in real trouble from the soil destabilization and wildfire, and they belong to towns that do not have the budget capacity to do much about it. Finally, Mr. Chair, the question that I think comes up logically is if you're going to study something, why put a particular proposal on the table rather than ask the open question, how should we fund wildfire? The answer to that is that we have tried that a number of times. That people, depending on how people count, it's different times. It's a blank canvas. It's extremely difficult, and we haven't gotten very far. And Senator Steiner's group worked really hard, and as I say, they made some progress, but of course didn't come near answering the big question. Her bill wants things to continue. If it does, I would like to be part of that. But the blank canvas effort hasn't been successful. This is a new approach. It says, putting this on the table, this is like a straw man, I guess you could say, to push against, to get critiqued. The result, the study could say, this is the stupidest idea ever. It could say, there's real promise here. It could say, this is strong, this is weak. What about this revision that another state uses, that kind of thing. My belief is that after a number of sort of failed starts, this might get us where we need to go and closer to a conclusion and an approach that could work. With that, again, Mr. Chair, I thank you for the time and for your hearing this bill.
Thank you so much.